Hi, welcome to Paul's View, and today's topic is, can Democrats walk and chew gum at the same time? In other words, can they investigate and legislate and litigate all at the same time? If you recall, at the State of the Union address, Trump had said that if you investigate, you're not going to be able to legislate. And then he picked up that same mantra after the infamous infrastructure meeting with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, where he said the same thing. If they investigate, they're not going to be able to legislate. It is interesting that Republicans do excel in one very important thing. They control the narrative. Kellyanne Conway was on the White House lawn a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about how the White House was focusing on infrastructure and pharmaceutical pricing, and that the Congress was doing nothing. So I asked her, I said, well, does that mean that if Nancy and Chuck would want to come back to continue the discussion with Trump on infrastructure, would he welcome them back? And she said, of course, but not if they continue to accuse him of things like a cover-up. So the question is, as I said, can Democrats litigate and investigate and legislate at the same time? And the answer is yes. And that's just what they're trying to do now. The House Intelligence Committee is moving forward on looking into the Mueller investigation as it applies to the Volume 1 of the Mueller report, which was the Russian interference in our 2016 election. The House Judiciary Committee is looking into Volume 2 of the Mueller report, and having hearings on that, which is about obstruction of justice by the president. While that is going on, while the investigation piece is going on, House Democrats are also passing legislation. H.R. 1 is the For the People Act of 2019, and that was sponsored by our own Congressman John Sarbanes, and that includes a whole host of things. It includes not suppressing the vote. It includes access to the ballot box. It includes reduce the influence of big money in politics, and it includes strengthening ethics. Where does that bill sit, you ask? It sits on Mitch McConnell's desk. Mitch McConnell called that bill socialism. I question that. How could expanding voting access and enforcing ethics be considered socialism? To me, that's democracy. Another bill is H.R. 8. That is the Bipartisan Background Checks Act. That closes the gun show loophole on the internet and at the gun shows. And 90% of Americans support having universal background checks, and to close those two loopholes, which did not exist when the Brady bill was first passed in 1993. All right, there was no internet then. So now it's just updating it, and 90% of the people are supportive of that to face the problem, the epidemic of gun violence. Where does that bill sit? It sits on Mitch McConnell's desk. Mitch McConnell apparently is part of the 10%, along with the NRA, that don't support it. H.R. 5, the Equality Act. This prohibits discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity. That bill, too, sits where? In the, as McConnell calls it, the elephant graveyard for Democratic legislation, the Republican-controlled Senate. The Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act. That's not even an act. That's a reauthorization of an act that already exists. It's not a new act. Where does that exist? Again, the Violence Against Women Act, it sits with Mitch McConnell. And this one also, the Climate Action Now Act, that also has been passed in the House, the Democratic House. And that basically prevents the Trump administration from using federal dollars to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. Basically, he can't withdraw from it until November 2020, but he has indicated that that's what he plans to do. This would prevent that because they couldn't use federal funds. Where does that bill sit? You guessed it, Mitch McConnell's desk. And the last one I want to emphasize is the House on May 16th approved a three-part bill to lower prescription drug prices, and it passed 234 to 183. And it was designed to protect against unfair barriers by manufacturers that impede generic drug entry into the marketplace by manipulating the system to extend their monopolies on specific drugs. A couple of points. It bans the practice of brand name manufacturers from paying competitors to keep generic versions of drugs off the market. Who even thought that that was going on? But it is, and this bill would prevent it. Another thing that it does is it tries to control the arbitrary increase of drug prices because of the patent owned by the drug manufacturer. Does the name Martin Shkreli ring a bell? He's the one who think Daraprim. That was a 62-year-old drug used to treat parasitic infections in pregnant women and HIV patients. If you recall, he jacked the price up because he owned the patent, he jacked up from $13.50 a pill to $750 a pill. This legislation would address that. Where does that legislation sit? You guessed it, on Mitch McConnell's desk. The only question that remains is, when the history is written about this period in our time, this political times, who is going to be condemned as having done more damage to our democracy, Donald Trump or Mitch McConnell? I leave you with that to think about, and stay tuned next time. If you think that, if you are riled up about what I just went over with the fact that all these important bills sit in the Senate with Mitch McConnell, then I suggest that maybe you might want to share this video with whomever. I'll leave that at that point, and see you next time on Paul's View.